Wow, it's really exciting to be here. Thanks so much for the nice introduction, Lee. So I want to share with you today basically our learnings over the last 2 years, what we learned from running GraphQL in production, what we've learned from working with the community. So yeah, I'm Johannes Schickling. I'm based in Berlin, spending more and more time also here in San Francisco. Work at GraphQL, have a lot of I've quite a background in like Node, Rust, Swift, Go, and built a VR company before. But today I am pleased to not have to give an introduction to GraphQL. But I want to talk very briefly about our history, what Lee has already teased. Briefly recap the state of the art of how GraphQL backends are being written from scratch. I want to announce something really exciting today and give a quick live demo of that. So let's start off with our history. So maybe you've seen some of our open source projects so far. So for example, we've written this probably the smallest GraphQL client so far, which you can use both in the front end and back end. Together with Facebook, we've also worked out GraphQL-Config, which is the foundation for quite a couple of GraphQL tools. One of which is the GraphQL CLI, which helps you with common workflows like fetching your GraphQL schema for front-end tools. And just a couple of weeks ago, we've released the GraphQL Playground, which is a more kind of feature-complete GraphQL IDE that's standalone as Electron app and like supports features like subscriptions and a more powerful history and so on. So feel free to check that out. So we really got started like at the beginning of at the end of 2015 when we were building our first GraphQL server. And as I've implemented the first version of that, it really struck me that like this mapping from your API to your database, like that's very generic, and that's a problem that backend and service in general wanted to solve. And like I've tried out Parse and Firebase in the past, but it was always too limited. So GraphQL finally unlocked really the potential of backend and service. So long story short, we started to build backend and service based on GraphQL. So in February 2016, we've cranked up the first prototype. A couple of months later and a lot of iterations later, we onboarded the first 100 developers to our preview. And to make it, since back then was quite difficult to get started with the front-end technologies of GraphQL, and we wanted to help the community to get there faster, so we've created Learn Relay as a learning resource to Learn Relay, and a couple of months later, Learn Apollo. And yeah, this year in May, we've officially launched GraphQL on Product Hunt and Hacker News, and at the same month, we've also had our first conference in Berlin, where a lot of you were as well. So based on the learnings we had from Learn Apollo and Learn Relay, and together with our amazing community, we created How to GraphQL, where I'm now super excited that more than 250,000 people actually went through that and learned GraphQL. So yeah, we've seen like a lot of people building apps using GraphQL. So by now we have like more than 50,000 services deployed on GraphQL, serving more than 1,000 requests per second. Our backend is implemented in Scala using Sangria. Our front end was like since the very beginning we've used Relay and had like also a couple of side projects in Apollo and really seen that evolution, which is amazing. And we are also super fortunate to have such an amazing community in our Slack, where we have not more than 5,000 people. And yeah, so based on all of these GraphQL servers that we've seen when going into production, I wanted to share like a couple of insights with you and recap for the ones who are just getting into GraphQL how you can build GraphQL servers. So historically, and this is what Lee and Dan and so on has already presented, GraphQL is typically known as an API gateway technology, as a proxy technology. So that you really take GraphQL and put it in front of your existing services and existing infrastructure. But that has made GraphQL incredibly popular, and now people start thinking about, why should we like keep building our APIs in REST, why don't we just use GraphQL from the beginning? And this is what, like Apollo, I think you already also talked about this as like a GraphQL first approach, and the more technical term is what we call GraphQL-Native backends. And so this is really, I think, an important way to think about this, that you have one, GraphQL as an API gateway technology, but also you can use GraphQL to build servers from scratch. And it gets especially interesting when you combine both of these, and this is where what so many talks are also about GraphQL schema stitching, where you can take existing GraphQL microservices and compose them together in an API gateway. So schema stitching, for those of you who don't know, is basically the idea of taking one or multiple GraphQL APIs, schemas, stitching, combining them together, extending them into a new API, into a new schema. So there are a lot of interesting implementations spearheaded by GraphQL tools, but there's also GraphQL Weaver and a couple of others. And this unlocks like a whole variety of great possibilities. There are also some challenges that we have to face, where we have to come up with best practices, how you would map types from these GraphQL native APIs to your GraphQL gateway. But this is a super, super exciting area, really. So if you were to build a GraphQL server from scratch, I think the ecosystem is in a phenomenal state. So the idea, basically, what you need to do to implement a GraphQL server is, one, is you have to define your API schema, and then actually implement that API using typically a pattern that's called resolvers. So the ecosystem is pretty mature by now. So in pretty much every language and for every technology, you have great libraries. GraphQL.js, Apollo Server, GraphQL Tools, and Node. You have Sangria and Scala, Graphene and Python. In Java, you have a really thriving community, like pretty much in every language. So once you've chosen your technology, now you can actually start implementing your GraphQL server. And there's a ton of stuff that you need to do. So most importantly, as you're building a new server, you want to persist. You want to read the data from somewhere, and you want to persist the data. So you really want to map your API to a database. You probably need to implement some further API controls, such as like pagination, how you order your data, how you filter your data. You mostly also need an authentication and authorization system. If you want to build a real-time app, it makes also sense to provide a GraphQL subscription API. But most importantly, where you really want to get to is implementing your business logic. So a lot of these things that I just talked about can be solved by better building blocks, and some of these is where you really want to focus on. And this was basically when we started out with GraphQL. This was what it was all about. We wanted to build better building blocks for building GraphQL servers. But we started out as a backend service. That's maybe the enlightenment moment here. It's too early. So we've built a backend service so far. And while this is really, really easy to get started with, it's too dark. While it's really easy to get started with and you get off the ground quickly, there are also a couple of limitations around that, and we've received a lot of feedback. So you have to notice that, like, so far we've had like a web-based console where you click together your backend, and that arguably is not the best approach of how you implement your backend. So together with our community, we've got a lot of feedback around how to evolve the workflows. You want to have a local development workflow. You want to be integrated into a continuous integration, continuous delivery, and in general get more flexibility. But most importantly, there's really this big problem around vendor lock-in. So for example, when Parse got acquired and shut down, that really scares a lot of people, and that's very understandable. So we try to see how can we address all of these concerns, all of these questions, and took a really, really big step forward. So as of today, GraphQL, we will open source GraphQL and turn it into a open source backend development framework. So that means you can run GraphQL completely locally, deployed on your own clusters, get involved in the open source development process. So we're super, super excited about this. So I want to quickly walk you through some of the features and afterwards give you a quick demo. So at the core of the GraphQL framework is what we call a GraphQL database. It's not really a database, rather an abstraction. I'll get to that in a second. It also comes with a powerful permission system that enables you to implement authentication authorization workflows. It integrates out of the box with functions as a service like AWS Lambda and serverless functions to implement event-driven business logic. It also comes with a GraphQL subscription API that you can use directly in your front-end application. And since the world has very much changed from like back in the days where you have like Rails and you build a monolith and the cloud wasn't really that much of a thing where you have like cloud dedicated infrastructure, this has changed completely. Now you have like queues and S3 and all of that. So we really designed it from the ground up to run in the cloud, and that's what's called cloud native. So the runtime is actually cloud native. So at the core of the GraphQL framework is this GraphQL database. Again, it's an abstraction of an actual database. So currently, it's using MySQL as a storage engine. We are also working towards a Postgres storage engine. And it's really an abstraction in two dimensions. So one, to query, mutate, and stream your data. And secondly, also to evolve your data model and your underlying schema of your database through GraphQL SDL. So by using GraphQL, this is effectively like language and technology agnostic, so can be used like from within any backend implementation like Python or Node, and that makes it really exciting. So the core idea is really you define your data model using GraphQL SDL, which you have here on the left, where you, for example, have a user model and a post model. And out of that, the framework generates a CRUD-style API that you can use from your GraphQL gateway, or you use it directly from other backend applications or your front end. So at the core of that, there is an efficient implementation of a caching mechanism and an advanced data loader engine. And based on this CRUD API, you get a lot of advanced GraphQL features out of the box. So for example, a pagination mechanism. So that can be either offset-based or cursor-based. It also comes with a filter engine, so pretty much everything that you can express with SQL queries, you can also express using this GraphQL-based filter system. And also a concept we call nested mutations is really powerful for front-end development workflows where you want to create entire subtrees of data in one go. And we're also currently working towards supporting more flexible aggregations in this API directly. So the architecture is fairly simple. So obviously you have like your GraphQL client somewhere, you have your development environment, and you deploy that to a cloud. So at its core, you have a database and a CRUD API abstracting that away. If you want to use an API gateway, then you can use that as a proxy and to tie in your legacy systems. Additionally to this GraphQL database, it also comes with an event gateway. This event gateway combines it with functions as a service like AWS Lambda and makes it easy to integrate with external APIs. And based on the event gateway, this also feeds a subscription API. This entire architecture can be deployed either on your own cloud or can be deployed on-premise using Docker and Kubernetes. So to get started, you just need to basically install GraphQL using npm, run GraphQL init, that sets up a new project for you. You define your data model, deploy it, and you have a ready-to-use GraphQL endpoint. So at the core of a service definition, you have a GraphQL YAML file, which points to your GraphQL data model. You can define database permission rules and authentication, but also asynchronous logic flows. And as we've already seen, your data model you specify using GraphQL SDL. So I think the easiest way for you to show this is to run a quick demo. So hopefully this works. Is this big enough? Otherwise, I make it bigger. So you basically just need to run GraphQL init. This sets up a new project for you. So in this project, we basically have the GraphQL YAML file and a types.graphql file. So let's open that types.graphql file. Here we have a user model which has a name and a date of birth. So we can just say GraphQL deploy. Here we say we want to deploy it to a local development cluster. We call this Summit demo. This is deploying. And we have a GraphQL API that we can use. And here we can do things like give me all users and their name and their date of birth. We can also work with relations. So let's quickly uncomment this, deploy this again, reload the schema, and can say for every user we also want their posts and their title. So obviously we don't have any data in there yet, so you can use the CRUD style mutations to do so. So for example, creating a user with a date of birth, and so I'm not going to go too deep into that since I've prepared a little demo, which also includes the API gateway. So first, I want to walk you through the project setup. That's also on GitHub, so you can check it out afterwards. And then we're gonna run it and hope that it works. So at its core, you have an index.ts file. So it's written in TypeScript, but it also works in JavaScript. And so let's quickly walk through what this does. So it's using GraphQL tools. And it basically creates an HTTP link to your GraphQL database. You then extend your schema to what your schema should actually look like. You implement the resolvers by deferring to your GraphQL database and composing it this way. And that's basically it. So the schema that we want to have here is we want to say we still kind of like we think about how has relay expected the API. So we, for whatever reason, we use it here in this demo. And so a viewer type has the currently authenticated user and has all top posts. And these types that are being referenced here are just being used based on your GraphQL database. So let's take a look at the implementation. And we also have an auth mutation. So let's take a look at the implementation. So for example, for the currently authenticated user, we get from the HTTP context, we get the JWT authorization header. We extract the user ID out of that, and we just delegate the user query back to the GraphQL database. So the entire mapping that you would have before, where you delegate to Mongo or Postgres, that's really now a GraphQL request that you can just forward. The same for your top posts here, where you can map your arguments. And also for here, we are implementing an authentication mutation, which is really just getting a user, comparing the passwords really securely here, and creating a JWT. So let's quickly do so. So first I will deploy this. Again, I'll deploy this locally. Demo 1000. And I get here GraphQL endpoint. I copy that, put it here into my environment variable, since this is the way how I configure my GraphQL environment. Reload it. So let's actually take a look at the at the API, which should be empty. So we can say all posts. We don't have anything in here, but I've prepared a little seed script. Let's make this a bit bigger. So here I have like all posts, and here the little data set I've prepared is from a couple of people you probably know. And this API really enables you to do all of these CRUD features that I told you about before. So you can filter by where the title contains Tesla and the author name contains Elon, and you just get that back. So the underlying API works. So now let's start the GraphQL gateway. This is now running here. First, we want to authenticate. It's a very secure password. Let's grab that context here. Say the authorization header. It's this. And let's check whether we authenticated. And there we are. So we get all posts that we've ever written. And yeah, so this is just a really, really brief demo of how it works when you want to use a GraphQL database directly. Yeah, and that's basically all I have today. The key takeaways are, I think it's really powerful to think about these two use cases for GraphQL. One as a gateway technology, but also as with this GraphQL first approach. Second, again, the GraphQL framework is now open source. And all that I've shown on what I focused on right now is really this GraphQL database pattern. And this is what we are focusing more and more on. We also want to make this a standalone component that you can use inside, but also outside of the framework. And if you have any feedback about that, we'd love to hear it. So you find everything you need on our website. You can follow us on Twitter or check out our GitHub repositories, or find us here at the conference. There are a couple of us here with a green t-shirt. Feel free to find us and talk to us. And yeah, enjoy your lunch.